And good evening, and thank you for joining us. My name is Ryan Burrows, Executive Director of the American Kratom Association. We scheduled this meeting this evening to give you the latest details regarding the latest on Tampa Bay Times media attacks and our efforts to correct this blatant clickbait journalism. We will also provide an update on our plans for 2024, both at the state and federal level. We also have a special announcement regarding a new advocacy recognition program. Additionally, if you did not receive the request, please do so now and submit your questions. We would like to have all questions in the Q&A by the end of the presentation, so we leave enough time to answer all of them. Thank you, and I will now turn it over to Mac Haddo, Senior Fellow on Public Policy for the American Kratom Association.
Thank you, Ryan, and thanks to everyone who's joined us here this evening, both right in the webinar and then live streaming, and those that watch this later because of scheduling conflicts and all that. We wanted to have the opportunity to discuss in some detail the attack piece, the series of articles, 3+ is what's really the count, by the Tampa Bay Times. And let me just at the outset tell you that it normally is not a good practice to try to go after even if a media entity is unfair, because the old adage is you don't really attack someone who buys ink by the barrel. And so normally the good practice is let it lie. But in this case, you saw a newspaper who purports to be a fair newspaper, who's trying to provide a story that is balanced, go so far off the rails that it demands a response. And that's exactly what we're doing here tonight. We appreciate everyone who has signed so far, both the letter to the editor and the petition about the unfairness of this series of articles and the request that we have made for them to take down this clickbait sensationalized headline series that was designed for one purpose, and that was to actually demonize Kratom to the point where it is unrecognizable when it comes to the truth about what Kratom, in terms of its ability to help people and its success rate in doing so for so many. But I can tell you at the outset where the Tampa Bay Times got it wrong, and this is why we are so adamant about this particular hit series, is that the Kratom Consumer Protection Act is all about ensuring the safety of Kratom products sold to consumers. When you read the Tampa Bay Times series, you can come away with only one impression, and that is that the only thing that should be done is a ban on Kratom. That's what they're advocating for. And we believe that the reason they're doing that is because of the people that have been supporting this effort. We know with actual collaboration between the trial lawyers and the reporters, and we suspect based on evidence that we've seen, and certainly the Tampa Bay Times needs to actually clarify with evidence that our claims or our concerns about this aren't true, and that is that the trial attorneys have been funding this effort in order to go forward. Understand that this is not a typical news story. This is a project that was undertaken by the Tampa Bay Times over a 6-month period. They spent, by their description, $400,000 in producing a series of articles about Kratom that was staffed by 4 reporters full-time over that 6-month period. That is not the way journalism works in America unless there is an axe to grind, and there certainly appears to be an axe to grind in this case. I can tell you that when you look at the content of their stories, and they minimize and ridicule the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. For example, they say things like, oh, well, the Kratom Consumer Protection Act doesn't do much because all it does is say that a Kratom product that is adulterated with a controlled substance is illegal. And then they make the point that those controlled substances are illegal anyway. That's true, but it ignores the fact that in order for a local jurisdiction to have the ability to prosecute these kinds of bad actors in the Kratom space who are deliberately adulterating Kratom products, they need every tool that they can get. And what the illegality that's created in the KCPA is that when you add a controlled substance to a Kratom product, that adds an additional charge that is necessary and helpful for prosecutors that are looking to take these bad actors out of the marketplace. But that's ignored by the Tampa Bay Times. In fact, it is mocked by them, saying, oh, well, the Kratom Consumer Protection Act really is a protection for industry. Nonsense. It protects no industry member who is violating the standards of the Kratom Consumer Protection Act in terms of its illegality. And when you contrast that to what the FDA does today, which I can tell you was provided in detail to the Tampa Bay Times reporters, the FDA allows a completely unregulated marketplace across the United States when they have a statutory responsibility in order to enforce the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act that requires that products like adulterated kratom products be removed from the marketplace with every regulatory tool that's been provided by the Congress to the FDA to do so. They refuse to do that. And you can look at the evidence. We gave to the information to the Tampa Bay Times reporters that we at the AKA, through our Truth and Labeling program, had reported more than 85 kratom companies that were using illegal therapeutic claims to market their products. Now, it is up to the FDA to investigate a number of things. First, are those advertisements in their marketing materials specifically authored by that company? It's possible in this environment that these are counterfeit products that have stolen the name of a particular product. So the FDA needs to investigate that. We don't have those powers at AKA, but we have the right to report them and let the FDA investigate along the way. Secondly, the FDA has got to determine the economic fraud that goes on when a company that is marketing a kratom product that they manufacture to make sure that those marketing materials are actually violating the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. We provided evidence to them about the specific marketing materials, which included screenshots, links to their marketing materials on their websites, on blog posts, and other kinds of marketing materials so that the FDA could properly do its job, which is to investigate. And they have the authority to do so. They can go into those companies and demand that they provide that information. So our goal was to provide the FDA with the information to allow them to do so. And then after that investigation, obviously some action could be taken. Now, statistically, what are the chances that 85 companies over a 3-year period who were reported to the FDA would have been innocent of marketing illegally kratom products where they made associated therapeutic claims? I don't think that's in the realm of statistical possibility. What is more clearly the case is the FDA has refused to even investigate them. When the Tampa Bay Times reporters ask about this, our attorneys advised us that we should ask these and refer these reporters to the FDA. Let them ask the FDA. This is a group that spent full-time 6 months and $400,000 of the Tampa Bay Times money, however they got it, and they can't pick up the phone and call the FDA and say, okay, we understand that you received 85 complaints over the last 3 years of companies in the kratom marketplace who are illegally using therapeutic claims. Can you verify that? And can you tell us what the outcome of your investigation has been on those companies? That is the public record. The FDA is the one that has to investigate it. And yet when I gave this information, the Tampa Bay Times reporter said, well, give us the names of the companies. Now, first off, that exposes us to potential litigation where these companies could sue us. We can report it to a government agency under an existing framework where the government has a structure for consumers and entities like ours to make reports, but it's another thing to be providing that information to a reporter and obviously have the legal exposure. I explained that to the reporter. He didn't care. He said, well, if you're not going to give us the information, I said, pick up the phone and call the FDA. For goodness sake, that's the easiest pathway. And hopefully you've been talking to them in your 6-month, 4 reporters, full-time, $400,000 investigation. But they obviously did not do that. And then in their article, they say that we refused to provide the names of the 85 companies as though it weren't true. That's nonsense. I also told them that we had sent a sampling of those companies that were behaving this way to the Federal Trade Commission. Did you see any comment about that in their articles? Of course not, because this wasn't about whether the truth, it was about their hit job on kratom. And I can tell you repeatedly over the past several months, as I have had conversations with each of these reporters going through their various narratives about kratom, they have consistently conveyed to me that, oh, well, that's not the focus of our story. For example, I offered to them more than 3 dozen individuals who are Kratom consumers who will testify to them that the Kratom has improved the quality of their life or even indeed saved their lives. They weren't interested. They said it wasn't the focus of their story. I said, but you're talking about an issue here, and they kept telling me about deaths that were associated with Kratom, and that's obviously what they featured in their stories. That's the clickbait, sensationalized headlines that draws, they think, readers, not the truth. They weren't interested in talking to any of these individuals, and to my knowledge, never did. They wouldn't even accept the information that I provided to them. But we know at the same time, you had a leading trial attorney who has brought the majority of cases against Kratom manufacturers in the United States, who was openly soliciting on the Kratom Danger Awareness Facebook page for people to report to the Tampa Bay Times all of their negative stories about Kratom. By the way, that's fine. They're allowed to do that. It's a free country. And there's nothing wrong with that attorney, who's a very smart attorney, by the way. He is a fierce advocate for those families. Nothing wrong with him referring them. But when one of those family members said, "What should I say when I report to the Tampa Bay Times?" And he said, "Use my name. I'm all up with them." Of course, he was collaborating with them. He wasn't a interviewee. He was collaborating and helping them with their storyline, which was obviously anti-Kratom. Again, the Tampa Bay Times has the right to do whatever they want to do, and they can receive information from whomever they choose. But they have a duty, a public trust, in order to be at least fair about it. And that's particularly true for the Tampa Bay Times, because they are owned by the Poynter Institute, which is the leading advocate for journalistic ethics in the United States. How can they, with the parent company that owns them, engage in this kind of vicious, anti-Kratom, unfair, and dishonest campaign against us? And the evidence is overwhelming that they did nothing to look at the actual balanced part of this story. We advocate that science should dictate these policies. On Kratom, I provided them with hundreds of peer-reviewed published articles which documented the evidence that in fact Kratom can in fact be a very helpful tool for people that are struggling with addictions to opioids and other dangerous substances. They weren't interested. Did you see any reference to that other than a passing, "Oh, there's some people that think this"? There was specific evidence that they provided with testimonies of people in the scientific community that were anti-Kratom. Now, it's also true that they I believe, selectively took information provided to them from some of the leading scientists, and I don't think that there was a great deal of happiness about the way that they were portrayed. And you can look at the evidence. Dr. Chris McCurdy and Dr. Oliver Grumman actually wrote an op-ed piece that was published in the Hill newspaper here in Washington, D.C. And in it, they advocated for the passage of Kratom Consumer Protection Acts across the country. That wasn't what the narrative nor the story that the Tampa Bay Times tried to portray their position as being. What they did say is that these scientists are concerned about the super concentrated Kratom products in the marketplace. So are we. We believe that every Kratom product needs to be properly manufactured within restraints. Look at the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. Now, this is something that is egregious that the Tampa Bay Times refused to do. We showed them and explained to them why the provisions of the Kratom Consumer Protection Act were important to protect consumers in the states where this legislation has passed. First off, it sets the standards for the product formulations of Kratom. It does not allow for an extraction into a Kratom extract product that exceeds the formulary requirement under the USP that limits the power and the concentration of those Kratom products. That's a fact, and it's in the law. Do you see any mention of that? Of course not. I argued with them. It wasn't just presenting, because they started to kick back at me, these reporters, and saying, well, that's not the focus of our story. But that is the truth of the matter. And they of course published their nonsense about saying, oh, well, the KCPA really doesn't do enough. What does that mean? It does more than what the FDA does. And did you hear a single thing about the FDA's failure to regulate Kratom the way that they should? And most importantly, I called them out. I spoke to the reporter directly and I said, are you familiar with the latest shift that the FDA has made in their position on kratom with respect to its danger to the American public. Remember, for the past decade, the FDA has been publishing one thing after another, including an import alert, which is based on kratom's danger, two specific recommendations for scheduling. Under factor 6 of both of those scheduling recommendations, they said that kratom poses an imminent threat to the American public. That's what the FDA says. If you look at the submission that they made to the to the Expert Committee on Drug Dependence through the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs, they threw the kitchen sink at kratom under a far lower standard for scheduling. And at the end of the day, with the best evidence that the FDA could muster and throw against the wall, 12 independent scientists, not a single one who had was under any influence by the American Kratom Association, 12 independent scientists around the world who are specialists in this area under a lower standard said that the FDA had failed to meet its burden. This is astounding. When I pointed that out to them, they said, well, the FDA says it's dangerous. So back to that issue. I pointed out to them that on the federal case that's now being tried before a judge in the Southern California District Court, there was an issue that arose when they were trying to prosecute a kratom importer who had falsely labeled the kratom as fertilizer. And there was a disposition of that case where the importer pled guilty and had agreed to a plea agreement where he would serve a year and a day in prison as a result of these actions. In the course of that trial, which the Tampa Bay reporter told me he was, his quote, following closely, in the course of that trial, the judge raised the question about how the government could have shifted from their original indictment, which said that kratom was being used legally throughout the United States and therefore alluded to its safety because it was doing so, and how they were now arguing in the sentencing phase against this kratom importer that kratom was so dangerous that he needed to be put away for the maximum amount of time possible. And in the course of that, the judge said, okay, I want to know how you justify allowing kratom to be sold if you say it's that dangerous throughout the United States. And I need to know how the FDA can justify releasing kratom materials to this defendant prior to his indictment when he petitioned the FDA knowing that he had mislabeled it. How is it that they released it simply by him paying a fine and storage cost, which they did? The FDA actually released a held shipment of kratom that was subject to an import alert and that they had caught him mislabeling it, and they still released it. And as the judge said, knowing that that kratom raw material supply was going to be sent across the country to manufacturers who would then manufacture it into products that the consumers would ingest. How can they do that? And the government's response was, oh, well, the FDA has refined its position and they say it's dangerous. And the judge said, okay, I am ordering a hearing on January 11th, which would have been next week. And he wanted to have the FDA show up. It's called a Brady hearing. The sole issue was for the FDA to provide evidence and testimony about whether kratom is dangerous or not. And he ordered the hearing to be done. The U.S. attorney reported to the judge, and it's on a federal court record, that the FDA, and listen to this, the FDA refused to participate in that hearing. The basis for their refusal was, by their description, that they had not yet, the FDA, had not yet come to a determination as to whether kratom is dangerous or not. That's an astounding shift in the position of the FDA with respect to the dangers of kratom. It should have been the headline for the Tampa Bay Times. The reporter said, I'm following this case closely. I know they've done that. And then just as a safety measure, I sent him the court documents where this specific email from the U.S. attorney was provided to the defendant and subsequently was a part of the record before the judge. And what did the Tampa Bay Times do? Nothing. They refused to even acknowledge that shift because the premise of the story, and you can read it for yourselves, is that kratom is dangerous and the FDA says it is. That's simply not true. If this newspaper really wanted to tell the truth, they would have at least been balanced enough to say, the FDA said this before, now they're saying this now, and the circumstances under which that shift took place, and allow the readers to decide whether or not they think the FDA is credible on this issue. But here's the bottom line. What this newspaper report wanted to do was to demonize Kratom. And what did they do with their best evidence? They said that there were 46 Kratom-only deaths in Florida over a 10-year period. Now, is that accurate? Well, it's accurate that the medical examiners reported it and actually listed that as the cause of death. But my question to these reporters, and I gave them evidence to back up the challenge to it, was whether or not the medical examiners appropriately classified those deaths as Kratom only. And the reason I raised that and the evidence that I provided to these reporters, which they ignored, was that the Centers for Disease Control in 2019 did a survey of which they got medical examiners and coroners from, I think it was 27 or 29 states, reporting that there were 91 Kratom-associated deaths. Now, they accurately portrayed that as a significant number of those being polydrug use, fentanyl, morphine, heroin, cocaine, the list goes on. And that's a fact. But of the CDC's report, there were 7 deaths that were reported by medical examiners as Kratom only. And after examining those 7 deaths, what the Centers for Disease Control concluded was that there was no standardized post-mortem investigation protocols that would verify that the actual claim that was made by the medical examiners was correct. And they cited a New England Journal of Medicine commentary that involved the investigation by researchers and scientists in the state of Colorado over a 10-year period where they identified in Colorado 15 Kratom-associated deaths, of which there were 4 that were Kratom only. So that's the baseline. When more sophisticated analytical tools were used to analyze those Kratom-only deaths, there were 3 blood samples that were available. 1 was not available. Of those 3, they found that all of them, every single one, was polydrug use. They just needed to use more sophisticated technology. I told the reporters that in addition to that evidence, there is an ongoing case right now where a coroner in the state of Ohio listed as the cause of death Kratom only, claiming that that's what killed this young man. And the mother of that son is courageously suing that coroner, and we're helping her. But she's taken the initiative to challenge this coroner and say, no, Kratom saved my son's life. He was an addict. He was suffering, and Kratom saved him. And he had been free of all of these other problems and drugs that he was using for 5 years. And this coroner callously said no. And when the lawsuit was filed against them, a couple of significant things happened. I told this to the Tampa Bay reporters. They ignored it. First is that the coroner destroyed the blood sample so that it would not be subject to an independent evaluation that we would have a right to have with an independent lab to evaluate whether the same thing would happen as was found in the Colorado and the CDC cases, where with more sophisticated equipment, it found that there was polydrug use. Now, this is important because it goes to the screen. If you test for 5 substances, then you might miss many substances. There are many novel new substances. If you test for 10, you still might miss some. If you test for 15, there's still a chance, but at least you are encompassing a larger number of known substances that contribute to the deaths of individuals. This is an important point because what we have now found in the Ohio case, when the blood samples were submitted to the NMS labs, which is one of the leading forensics toxicology firms in the country, regularly used by these medical examiners and coroners, when it was submitted to them, they admitted, the lab have acknowledged, based on their own analysis, that the level of metrogenine that popped on this young man's tox screen was a third of what they consider to be a level of concern. No scientist has yet identified a level of Kratom that is toxic. So they said that it's a third of the 1,000 nanograms per milliliter, which the NMS labs in a peer-reviewed published article says should be of concern and worthy of more investigation, not worthy of a conclusion that it's Kratom only. And yet the Tampa Bay Times people ignored all of that in spite of the evidence that I provided. But here's the kicker. The NMS labs destroyed the blood sample in violation of their own protocols and how long they're be held. The coroner destroyed the blood sample. So now the coroner is subject to an expoliation charge in the state of Ohio because they destroyed evidence that's part of a court case that's litigating the very issue of whether or not it was a valid claim. But then we found out an astounding fact. This Kratom-only death, the only thing that NMS Labs was asked to do by the local coroner was to test the metrogeny level. They didn't even test for 2 drugs or 3 or 5 or 10 or 15. They tested only for Kratom. When I disclosed that to the Tampa Bay Times, they were not interested. How can that be? How can a paper that publishes the 3-part series, 16,000 plus word expose on Kratom not at least acknowledge that there is evidence on the table that directly contradicts what they're saying? Is it any wonder that we stand here today outraged at the way that they've conducted this investigation to demonize Kratom? We know that that series is going to be replicated on the internet. We're going to hear about it ad nauseum by state legislators who are going to be hyped into listening to it. But we also know that the other thing that the Tampa Bay Times is up to, and they repeated to me consistently that their defense about their investigation was they were a Pulitzer Prize winning newspaper. Well, I think the Pulitzer Prize committee, and this is obviously, they don't spend, 4 reporters, 6 months and $400,000, but for that objective. And I don't think the Pulitzer committee is going to look very kindly at this kind of haphazard, shoddy investigation by a group of reporters that had one bias, and that was anti-Kratom, that were collaborating with trial attorneys in order to get the stories that they wanted to feature, and ignoring the thousands of people that have stood before legislative bodies across this country and talked about the value that Kratom has brought to their lives. When I said to them that, the FDA is the one that's the culprit, why don't you talk to them about why they failed to regulate? Why hasn't the FDA prosecuted any one of those 85 companies that were making illegal therapeutic claims? Why is it that they ignored the grand shift that the FDA took in terms of their position on the safety of Kratom? It's because this is a biased story. And that's why we took on this battle for a newspaper that buys ink by the barrel. And we think it's time, as a matter of principle, to stand up to them. We can have legitimate disagreements on policy. Goodness knows we have that with many of our critics. The Kratom Danger Awareness Group is obviously just convinced that their loved ones died from a Kratom overdose. And it's unfortunate because I have tried numerous times to reach out to them to have this discussion, because I believe sincerely that there are things that we could agree on. And if the science does not support the scheduling of Kratom under the criteria set under federal law in the Controlled Substances Act, nor does that science support the scheduling in some of these states, then why wouldn't we try to regulate these products so that the dangerous products that are out there that are super concentrated, that really are causing adverse events and perhaps deaths, that they should be eliminated from the marketplace? We should agree on that. But here's the bottom line, and I get it that these families are feel aggrieved. I understand that. I don't think that people of goodwill do the kinds of things that are evidenced by the Kratom Danger Awareness Group, where they weaponize their attacks against us. I don't think people of goodwill would say that Mac Haddo is the child of Satan and Hitler, and that's on the Kratom Danger Awareness website. That's not a credible claim. That's vicious. It's mean. It's unbelievable, and yet they allow it to happen. I can tell you that when we hear these kinds of comments on any AKA platform that are done by pro-Kratom people that attack personally, another person who has a different point of view, we remove them. But there's no effort. In fact, it's encouraged and in fact applauded under the Kratom Danger Awareness. This is an extremist group that has no credibility. And yet that's where all of the efforts by the trial attorney was mining these stories and sending them off to the Tampa Bay Times. And we know that many of them were featured by the Tampa Bay Times. How could there not be a better prescription or a recipe for a biased claim for a product that many in the scientific community have concluded actually has helped people, saving their lives? Now, is it true that you can abuse Kratom? Yes. I know when I first started in my journey of understanding about Kratom, based on the science that was available at the time, I made statements that Kratom is not addictive. And while there is some splitting of hairs that people could make about the addictive qualities or that are associated with kratom, I can tell you today, based on the science, that you can become dependent on kratom. I think that that's an important distinction to be made. I think that that crosses in with some people, as have been documented by scientists, that you can have an addiction to kratom that would be health threatening. And I think that those people need to have it, but that's not the common kind of experience that people have. And while I get hammered hard when I say this, I'm going to say it again. There is responsibility for people that use any consumer product. I can't take a cough syrup medication and not follow the directions that are on there, because I know that if I take double of what the cough syrup medication says, then I'm probably going to get some relief faster, but it has negative side effects because the serving size that's recommended is based on the experiences of other people that had it, and it's a safe dose, if you will, of that cough syrup. That's true for a multitude of consumer products. And no one, I don't care that as much as people may criticize it, and they'll say, oh, well, they're criticizing the Mac Caddo's criticizing our loved ones. If a person has abused kratom or any other substance, and the result is that they have a health consequence, they bear a responsibility for that. We at the American Kratom Association argue strongly that companies have a duty and an obligation to manufacture safe products and to provide the appropriate labeling that shows what the doses are. This is an industry that is also learning. This is an industry that has operated for too long because the FDA allows it to happen and actually creates a disincentive for compliance. We're now seeing many of these companies coming into compliance, and I think that's a good thing. Unfortunately, it is the vast minority of the kratom manufacturers in this country who are coming into compliance because most of them like operating in the Wild West. That's not a reason to ban a product. That's a reason to regulate it. And the idea that you can ban a product because someone is abusing it, or if a manufacturer is producing a product that is fundamentally unsafe, that's on the backs of the FDA. But you don't see the trial attorneys suing the FDA, even though the FDA has abrogated its statutory responsibility to regulate kratom. That's provable. The reason that you don't see trial attorneys suing the FDA is obvious. There's no money in that pot. They can fix it in terms of policy, but they could not extract a financial reward from doing so. That's why trial attorneys stay in their lane, which is to go after manufacturers. And I think that to the extent that the manufacturers are operating illegally, they should be prosecuted. But the FDA doesn't get off the hook just because trial attorneys let them. The FDA doesn't get off the hook just because the Tampa Bay Times won't say the emperor has no clothes. We've simply got to stand up and tell the truth about kratom and insist that those that hold the public trust, like the Tampa Bay Times, must do their duty, and that is to call the FDA to account where they have failed to provide the statutory regulatory scheme that they should be doing in order to protect the American public. We encourage every single person who is listening to us to sign the email, send an email to the editor, tell him that it's time to rescind those stories, and let's reset the story to accommodate the truth. And let's ask them, obviously, on the petition, add your names to it, because we want to present that to the editor so that he sees and can't just dismiss us out of hand and try to brag about the fact that it stirred the pot. It stirred the pot not because there are radical people out here that are trying to criticize what they're doing, because there are people who are everyday Americans who were disadvantaged by a story that was untrue, lacked the factual basis that any responsible journalistic endeavor should address. And that didn't happen here. I don't know who to blame in terms of who has the biggest amount of blame, but they got on a railroad that came rushing to the brink, and they went off the tracks. And whether it was the trial attorneys at the wheel or these biased reporters, I have no idea. But someone has to be called to account. And that's why this effort is so important as you go forward. The bottom line is the American Kratom Association is about protecting the safety of the American public. That is what we're committed to. That's what our legislation does. We have improved as we've learned more through the scientific endeavors that have informed us. We've improved the provisions of the Kratom Consumer Protection Act in order to address those. We are not sitting on the sidelines. And for them to suggest, them being the Tampa Bay Times, to suggest that the American Kratom Association is just a tool for the industry, tell that to the probably more than almost 8,000 Kratom manufacturers who hate the FDA. I'm sorry, the KCPA and the AKA. They hate us because we're bringing a regulatory scheme that they don't like. I get calls all the time from these Kratom vendors who say, you know, you're off the rails here. You need to rein it in because you're trying to put me out of business. And I say, yes, we are. If you're not willing to manufacture your products meeting good manufacturing standards for botanical supplements in the United States that are specified by FDA law, you should be out of business. And shame on the FDA for not calling them to account and doing it. I think that the next level for us all to work on is to find the appropriate labeling that enhances the safety so that the unsuspecting consumer, not those that were going to abuse it, because you can abuse loperamide, which is an anti-diarrheal medication, but look at the FAERS database and the number of people who have died from overdoses of loperamide, which is a diarrhea medication, because if you consume a lot of it, you can get high. It also can kill you. So look at those kinds of outcomes and understand that within the lane of responsible consumer behavior, that we can enhance the parameters of the safety, put guardrails into effect with good legislation. That's what the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act does. It requires the FDA to behave as they should as a regulatory body protecting the American public and their safety, not to go off on a tangent when they get a bias, as they have against all dietary and botanical supplements and have had for decades. They don't get to prosecute it on the backs of people who are being helped. Please go and look at the congressional briefing statements that were made by Dr. Volko, the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse. Now, why would she come and participate in a congressional briefing if everything that's being said by the trial attorneys and the Kratom Danger Awareness and the Tampa Bay Times were true? She wouldn't. But she's a scientist, and she's looking for the solution to some of these problems and sees Kratom for what it is, as a potential harm reduction tool that can be used by some in order to wean off of very dangerous opioids. Read what Dr. Joie said in his rescission letter on August 16th of 2018. Read it. Don't just condemn it, as some in the Kratom Danger Awareness community do. Read it and see what he says. He offers the pathway for what the FDA should do in order to reconcile this issue about whether Kratom is dangerous. And he laid out the pathway. And here we are in 2023, 5 years later. And finally, the FDA is getting around to publishing their human abuse potential study, which will be contracted for in March of this year. And then probably within a year and a half, will be in. We welcome that. Because if it's done fairly, and I'm going to assume for the moment that it is, if it's done fairly, it's going to show what all the other science up to now has shown, which is that Kratom, when responsibly consumed, is safe. When it's properly formulated, is safe. When it's properly labeled and consumed that way, it is safe. It's not the panacea for everyone. We don't suggest that it is. But for those who are benefiting from it, they should be allowed to have access to it rather than being interfered with by schlocky journalism like you saw in the Tampa Bay Times. That's why we need your help. We have a newspaper that weaponized the power of the pen, which was entrusted by the American public to create the opportunity for them to do so, to have these kinds of articles. But they have an obligation in return for that in order to earn the trust of their readers. It is no wonder that the American media has such a low confidence rate among the American people. It's lower, I think, in some cases than the Congress. It tells you how bad things are. The first step that the Tampa Bay Times could take is simply rescind their articles, reset, look at the evidence, and then republish with a far more balance. They can criticize us where the criticism is due. They can even have an opinion that's different from ours. But we can have a civil discussion about those kinds of things. I'm going to give one concession that I was criticized for by the not the Tampa Bay Times, by the Kratom Danger Awareness people. They said that I was a hypocrite because I condemned the language that was being used, calling me the child of Hitler and Satan, and other awful things, calling me a murderer. And yet I had the audacity to say that trial lawyers were casket chasers. Now, I think that was a mistake. I shouldn't have used that language, but it wasn't against any specific individual, and I didn't demonize any individual trial attorney. I just said generally that the characterization that's very common in our society about them being ambulance chasers, I probably took a step too far, and I apologize for that. I'll wait to see if there's a recognition by the Kratom danger awareness people that they should also do the same, that they should strip from their Facebook page that kind of language, that kind of hateful speech, because it makes them extremists. And anyone who's affiliated with them, and I don't think many would condone that kind of practice, it tells you about how far we've come. And to whatever extent those stories, because of the collaboration with the trial attorney, informed the Tampa Bay Times reporters who fell into the trap, shame on them. And I think time has come for a civil discussion. The Kratom danger awareness people are on this call tonight. We haven't banned them as they banned us. I offered to join the Kratom danger awareness group for the purposes of having a discussion, and they rejected it. They mocked me. They laughed at me. They said, "Oh, he's trying to get in." I went in through the front door. I knocked on the door, and it was slammed in my face. I think there's time for us to reasonable people to sit down and work this out. I'll give you another example that's really kind of surprising. It was reported on the Kratom danger awareness, and then reported in a newspaper by the brother of one of the KDA members that this individual had attended the congressional briefing. Now, at the outset of the congressional briefing, I informed everyone that was there that the questions at the end of the event would be reserved for congressional staffers who were in attendance. At the end of the briefing, because it had gone longer than we anticipated, and because I had made a commitment that we would conclude at 1 o'clock, I announced that those staffers would be able to write questions to the panelists, and we would convey them, and they would receive answers in writing. I did not stop anyone that was a congressional staffer from having the opportunity to have their questions answered. But what was reported in the newspaper, and I think this is again irresponsible journalism because I wasn't asked about it. It was reported that I looked the individual that was claiming that I did it right in the eye, and knowing that she had a question, that I cut the meeting off. Here's the truth of the matter. I wouldn't recognize this individual to pick her out of a lineup. I have no idea who she is. I've not seen her. I've not met her. I've tried to have conversations over the internet with her, and she's rejected those. This is the kind of silliness that we've gotten into. And that was published in a newspaper article by what is clearly a biased individual who obviously wants to grind the axe against the American Kratom Association, perhaps against me personally. But to suggest that that actually happened is absurd. But it tells you what we're up against. You have a media that's so biased, and that's why we have to take action. Everyone should join in and obviously help us in fighting back against this irresponsible journalistic tirade and attacks that they made on us. And we encourage you to do it and get everyone in your network to do the same thing that's going on. So, and before I go to the questions, just a couple of quick things. We are obviously actively working now on the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act. And we're going to be soliciting co-sponsors, and we're going to work hard on this. We're working every day to make sure that the Congress is properly informed about the right policy and how they have to fill the gap in protecting the American public. That's what the KCPA does. It protects the safety of consumers. And to do that, the FDA is not going to do it. They've proven that. The Congress is going to have to step in, much like they did in 1994 with the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, when similarly, the FDA refused to do their job. So that's important, and we're going to continue to work on that. We have a number of states that we're still active in and we'll be working on in 2024. It's over 15. We just added one today, and that's Nebraska, because there was a bill filed to ban Kratom in Nebraska. I reached out to the sponsor. Obviously, this was a part of the FDA narrative, and it was a part of the Tampa Bay Times story where they've demonized Kratom. So we have a little education effort to do. We want Kratom regulated. We will welcome Nebraska into the fold on that. We think that's important as we go forward. We're working hard to protect the American consumer, and we are fighting against those who exploit this marketplace, that are bad actors, that we acknowledge are bad actors. And I think sincerely that there is common ground that we can work with, even with those that disagree with some of our approaches, but we fundamentally should agree that this product needs to be regulated and the safety of the American people needs to be protected with those good regulations as we go forward. So that's where we are on that. And the last thing that I'll mention is Ryan told you that we are announcing a recognition program for the champions, the champion advocates, and we call it the Hall of Fame for the AKA of our advocates. The first legacy class of those honorees will include, of course, the original board of directors of the American Kratom Association, who led the fight initially. But there were many others that were involved in that battle, some of whom we have identified, others we likely have not. And so we encourage everyone to look at the post that we're going to put up and submit a nomination for who should be included in that legacy class of honorees. And we're looking for those people that were there in 2016. Give a short narrative explaining it, and we'll take the nominations, and we have a review board set up that's going to evaluate those. And we'll announce that first class by the middle of February. And then twice a year, we're also going to add 10 more advocates that would get into this Hall of Fame. We want to recognize people who are influencers in this community, who are fighting the good fight, who are trying to educate people, and we want to recognize them. There are many, many people that are deserving of this recognition, and we want to step up and do that because you should be recognized. It's easy for people to claim credit when something goes well. The old adage is that the success has many fathers and that defeat is an orphan. And we want to recognize those people that really been a part of this community that have done such a great job. So with that, before I get Ryan, is there anything you need to add before we go to the questions?
No, nothing outside of the questions, Mac. Thank you.
Okay, so Heidi, you've asked, what do we have a strategy to get the Mayo Clinic to take down their false information? Yes, we are reaching out to the Mayo Clinic, particularly with what I would call a seminal moment when the FDA admits in a federal court that they will not show up. They refuse to show up under oath to document their position on Kratom, and they acknowledge that they have not yet come to the determination that Kratom is dangerous. That's the predicate for us going to the Mayo Clinic, the Cleveland Clinic, and all the WebMD, all of these postings, health information websites, to help them modify their position. And we're going to be aggressive on that, and we're going to be pushing hard to make sure that that to the extent that we can do it, that we're going to push them back from their current position. Cami asks, is it possible with Tampa Bay Times to feature our side and point of view, possibly Kratom testimonies and science, or are they simply reporting biased news with an agenda? They're reporting biased news with an agenda. That doesn't mean that they can't repent. I believe in repentance, and I think that we can force them to look at the evidence. And I think that the editor, the main editor, not the investigative team, if they take a serious look at what the investigative team did, that they will see that there are weaknesses, and it's deserving of, at least at the minimum, a more balanced approach where there's another publication for this. So we're going to work with them. We need your help here. We need you to add your name so that it shows them that this isn't just the American Kratom Association complaining. These are people. These are real people that they suppressed their voices. They censored your voice, and now we need to call them out for it. Jeff asks, I guess there isn't a valid enough reason for a libel case against the newspaper. I don't think there is under the precedents. I think it's Shannon versus the Washington Post. There's a court precedent that's a very high bar to be able to prove that a newspaper has created any kind of slander or libel. So we're going to keep looking at it. Obviously, we want to do that. I think there may be some issues with the collaboration that they made, and if they did accept any financial support from a trial attorney. And by the way, we asked the question because of the apparent collaboration and a statement that was made publicly by a trial attorney where he said that, we were hypocritical in that we criticized funding for independent Kratom research. Now, we didn't criticize that trial attorney for anything that he now claims he was talking about, which is that they sent samples of Kratom products to the lab. I know of no one in God's green earth that criticized them for doing that. And yet that's his defense to say, oh, I meant that was the independent research. he made a statement, that particular attorney made a statement to one of our team that he had made a donation to the Tampa Bay Times for this story. And this is the same individual that offered $1 million to an advocacy group in order to help them with their advocacy of anti-kratom actions across the United States. I can connect those dots. I think that it's enough and sufficient evidence for the Tampa Bay Times to simply look at their donor list and tell us, is he on it or not? And if he is, how much? That's all we want to know. And I think they could easily do that without compromising any of the protections that they would have for donors that are offered under the IRS code. Cami asked, is it somewhat off topic but relevant? If the FDA recently made a public announcement stating they are holding a clinical study on human abuse potential kratom, should we be concerned? This is a great question. In 2021, the FDA announced that they were going to conduct a dose finding study. That is a study that determines whether or not the dosing of kratom in a human in a clinical trial setting, would that be dangerous? Because if it is unethical to conduct a clinical trial under a human clinical trial under the what's called the human abuse potential study. That was announced in 2021. They have run into enormous problems in identifying the right contractors because one of the provisions in that grant award was that the contractor was not permitted to publish the results without the specific written permission of the FDA. Every university and credible research institution in the country said, nonsense, we don't do business that way. There's never been a restriction on peer-reviewed independent research funded by the federal government from being published. And yet that's what the FDA wanted. We were relieved to see that it appears that they've lifted that restriction. Not clear yet, but it looks like they have. So we'll see when the contract, when we see the bids that come in, who actually makes the bids. But the more important point about their announcement yesterday that they are proceeding with the announcement for the contracting of the human abuse potential study is that in order to do so, they would have had to have conducted and finished the dose finding study, which shows that kratom can be safely ingested by a human to expose a human to kratom in a human clinical trial setting. So the key question will be, is the protocol for the study fair? I think the jury's out on that. We give them the benefit of the doubt, but we'll have our eyes on it, and we'll have experts that understand how these studies are conducted to determine whether or not the FDA has tried to put their thumb on the scale, which wouldn't surprise me, but hopefully not. And I think the truth of the matter is, frankly, that the scientists at the FDA really are pursuing the truth. It is a group of policymakers who are hell-bent in order to schedule kratom, and they're going to do everything they can to do it. So hopefully the scientists will control the design and the protocol of that study. And I'm looking forward to the results of that study, hopefully unbiased, that will show what other human clinical trials that have already been conducted. And so that's going to be the test that we evaluated against. How is it that somebody could do a human clinical trial and have a different outcome if the FDA has one than what was previously identified? So it's not going to be a free lane for the FDA to operate in. There are lots of restraints. So we're looking forward to what's actually going on here. Let's see. Are there any updates on Wisconsin and Indiana? We are now in I think about the 15th iteration of negotiations of the language of the Kratom Consumer Protection Act in Wisconsin that will remove the ban and that will then make it legal in Wisconsin. And I'm very encouraged with the latest round of discussions. We're getting to the point that I think we can live with some language that would still allow for the federal government a period of time in order to move to schedule kratom, which we know the science doesn't justify, or the Controlled Substances Board in Wisconsin, who has already in the last year evaluated, found that it was lacking in terms of meeting the factors required under Wisconsin law. So I think we're great there. Indiana, we're still stymied a little bit. We got it through the House, and the Senate chairman of the Health Committee had some concerns that we have not yet been able to resolve, but we're working hard on it. And I think in the next couple of months, we'll get those done, hopefully. And certainly the newest admission from the FDA is going to help dramatically. So hopefully we'll get some action there and we'll be able to move forward with that. So that's the update on that. I can tell you that we're very encouraged. We're working with the Vermont Department of Health on resolving the actual rule and regulation that will remove kratom up there, and we're very encouraged by the engagement with them. We're working hard in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, North and South Carolina, Florida to enhance the Florida Kratom Consumer Protection Act, in Georgia to enhance the Georgia Kratom Consumer Protection Act. We're currently working in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, and Iowa, now in Nebraska to hopefully reverse the thinking about a ban there. And we're also going to be very active in Louisiana and Mississippi. So we've got a lot of states we're working in. It's going to require another year of intense effort by our advocates. We're looking forward to getting back on the road, talking with these people and working as best we can with everyone. So we're really grateful. And I can tell you that when I go out there and meet with our advocates along the way, this is something that's really important for people to understand. These are real people that have experienced the benefit from consumption of kratom that can't be ignored with a wave of the hand and say, oh, well, kratom is dangerous. When people are experiencing with responsible use success in kratom, helping them with the variety of issues that is going on here. So I think that all of this is something that we can take great confidence in, that this community is engaged. It's ready to take the fight to the anti-kratom lobby. It's going to fight against the $1 million that some trial attorney sticks on to someone's budget. We've got the truth on our side, and I think that it's going to be a very good year for us in 2024. And with your help, we're going to be able to do it. I'm prepared to hit the road here. We've got a number of trips coming up, working with these states here in the next 3 weeks, and it'll be for the next 6 months, crazy time again. But I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to seeing many of you out there in those states where we're fighting these battles. So Ryan, with that, I think that's the end of the questions that I've seen, unless something new has come in. Oh, Misty asked, are we going to go back to DC? Let me tell you, yes, there's going to be a need for that. It was a wonderful event to see people that participate in that congressional briefing and then to fan out across Capitol Hill and visit with their individual members of Congress and their senators. Fabulous thing. We've had great feedback. It was exciting, and it's going to make a difference. There are going to have to be occasions. I think our next visit to DC is probably going to take place when they schedule the first hearing, but we'll keep you posted on that. We're excited that there was such a wonderful response. And let me just say, the opportunity to meet in person Shayna, who obviously had spent 8 months in an Alabama jail. And what a horrible experience that had to have been. But the just sense of her spirit, her gratitude for the kratom community that rose up and helped her, and the reason she was free from that incarceration was because of the generosity of so many people, and frankly, the support that was offered by some real champions in the kratom community. And Misty knows and who I'm talking about, and certainly there are a couple of people that are really key players in that, for which I'm grateful. And then to hear from the daughter, Marshall. I mean, these are tragic stories that we're hearing, and there needs from that to come a positive experience where legislators learn what the horrors of these kinds of laws are that create this kind of penalty and disruption in people's lives merely when they're trying to help themselves. And that's what was happening when Marshall Price and with Shana Brown. That's all that was happening. And yet they suffered these consequences, and their families have suffered. So we're grateful. We're grateful to a community that will rise up and do that, and for everybody that was a part of that. Sometimes we're not in common agreement on everything, but I can tell you we share one value, and that is that we want to get this right in terms of the regulatory scheme for kratom so that people have access to it legally and are not subject to unfair incarceration. I remember talking with Senator Booker back in 2016, and he was adamant on this point, that we had overpopulated our prisons with a failed drug war, and nothing could be more true than when it comes to kratom. And I don't think even our worst critic would wish that kind of penalty on people. I hope that's the case. And so I welcome the opportunity to have discussions with those critics, people that are willing to have an honest, frank, and civil discussion without the name calling, without the kinds of attacks that go on, because I think there are some values that we share. I think there are some fundamental agreement that we could embrace together about the current regulatory posture. We think science should dictate the policy on kratom. I'll say that over and over again. And so far, that's been the outcome, despite some of the critics along the way. And I'll tell you that a trial attorney should not dictate that policy because they have one objective, and that is to cash in. And here we're talking about protecting the American public, and that's something we're committed to. We'll stay doing it, and we'll continue to push for.